Hello, this is Mike at Gamefromscratch, and welcome to our new tutorial series. Today we're going to be looking at Unreal versus Unity. Specifically, we're going to start looking at the Unreal game engine. As mentioned in the last summary, or the introduction, what we're going to be doing is implementing a 2D game in both game engines. That way you can sort of see how the workflow works for both. So essentially you're going to get two tutorials in one. A couple changes from my initial introduction. First off, I've decided to go with blueprints. Sorry, C++ lovers, but I think there's enough interest in the blueprint way of doing things. It's a bit different. It's expanding my horizons a bit, and generally, interest and comments came back about 50-50 in terms of blueprints or C++. However, what I hope to do is, after the fact, revisit it and look at implementing each thing I did in C++ as well. So, sorry C++ fans, but hopefully I will get to you eventually. So in the meantime, we are going to be working with blueprints. The other thing I'm changing a little bit from my initial idea was, I'm going to go a little bit further. I'm going to go with Unreal first, and get to a certain point and then switch over to Unity. I've actually been looking at and learning both of them at the same time and trying to keep it together in my head. Working on both series, even just coming up with the right word Unity or Unreal as I need it is really getting difficult. So actually trying to do one, then the next, then back to the first, then the next, and so on and so forth is a nightmare for me. So I'm actually going to get a little bit further. I'm going to do like 2 or 3 probably tutorials on one and then switch to the other, and then do 2 or 3 and then switch back. Hopefully my brain can keep things a little bit more consistent. So what that means is, if you're waiting for the Unity stuff, you're probably going to wait a little bit longer, because I'm going to go a little bit further on Unreal to start. So today we're going to look at Unreal. We're going to look at the user interface, the basics getting started, and then we're going to create the simplest of Hello World applications. I'm going to be making use of a couple things. I'm going to make use of textures and sprites. And I'm going to cover those actually in the next tutorial or the tutorial after. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of how things work or why on that level. I want you to have more of a general overview. Again, a Hello World, welcome to Unreal Engine kind of approach. Now, I am going to, with both cases, ignore all of the default content. There's a whole bunch of starter projects to get you started. They come with pre-rolled textures, a pre-made scene, so you can just come in and press play. And it's brilliant, except for when you're trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And once you're trying to actually figure things out for yourself, this starter content actually starts getting in your way a bit. So I'm going to do away with all of it. We're going to roll all of this from scratch in both game engines. It's not as scary as it sounds, but it is a bit of a learning curve. I had to figure out how to actually get away from the beginner stuff to make this work. So let's fire up Unreal Engine here. You do so using the Epic Games Launcher. If you haven't already, you have to go and download the Unreal Engine itself. It's about, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 gigs. It's a big enough download, and it seems like every single time I start it up, I need to do an update. So get used to downloading a lot. But here it is. This is the launcher. You come in. You've actually got a couple of options across the top. So the Unreal Engine is your primary tab over here. But there's also Unreal Tournament, which is a community-developed game that if you want to get involved and work on, you can here. You can download the game and start with it. They've also got one called Fortnite that they're working on. I'm not sure actually if you can participate with Fortnite or not, but it is a game that you can sign up for the alpha and get going. But Unreal Tournament is actually an open source game that you can collaborate on. Now keep in mind, this is a AAA style game. It's super complex, super complicated, and it's probably going to appeal a little bit more to the modders. It's going to probably be one of the most modded games in history because of the way they've done things. But if you want to get involved in it, you can. You can build your own levels, mods, etc. But what we're interested in is the Unreal Engine itself. So most of the time you can ignore these things. Now, on top of things, you've got your news, which is basically just their blog in this format. Their learning resources, which are amazing. There's a ton of stuff there. I'm going to try and actually distill it down just to the information you need. So if you do have confusion or you do need help and you need to go a step further, go through Unreal's material. They have an incredible amount of it. And it's definitely there for you to look at. Now, the startup project is a little confusing because you actually run it in Unreal Engine. I've actually got that downloaded over here. This 3.5 gigabyte download creates a project that is a tutorial. It's a bit confusing on how it works, and I kind of wish they'd done things a little bit different, but it does make sense. Here, I can show you that quickly, actually. Actually, no, I won't load it. But it's a series of little mini applications within an application. It's kind of a confusing thing they've done, but it does illustrate a whole lot of what can be done with Unreal. And finally, you've got your marketplace. Marketplace is where you can buy basically turnkey content. Unity has an asset store as well. They're both kind of going along this route. Now, one of the interesting things that Unreal did, you'll see up here that I have a balance of 30 bucks. And that's because I had signed up for Unreal in the past. So when they went free, they actually gave everybody a credit. So if you signed up for and paid for Unreal at some point in the past, give it a check. You probably actually have a credit to spend on the store. There's some free stuff in here. And then there's a bunch of assets from people in the community, things like animations, pre-made models, pre-made levels, props, etc., that you can definitely use to get yourself started. And then, of course, there's even some tutorials, I believe, in here, blueprints you can roll with. And as I said, some of this is free, some of this is not. So this is the launcher. This is where you come in. The big thing is you actually want to have the engine installed. And once you do have it installed, just go ahead and select it and launch. And this will fire up the Unreal Editor. Now, for your reference, you can go ahead and close this if you wish. Now it's gone. So that's the launcher. The launcher is just to bring you in. You mostly just are going to launch it and launch the editor. So welcome to the brand new world. Let me just go ahead and delete some of these things that I've... All right, so I'm going to do a new project. Should be able to delete that guy. I thought I could. Can on the Mac. By the way, you'll find that the Mac and the Windows, which you're seeing right here, the Mac version actually is different. And I don't know why this launcher actually has a different look. This is all integrated into one screen. You pick different buttons. This isn't a checkbox. It's a button. It's very strange that they've made that slightly different. But here's where you come in to create a new project. And since I can't delete my old one for some reason, we're going to call this one Hello World 2 because the first one's taken. We want a blank project, and it's a project with absolutely nothing in it. In theory, there's actually still something in there which I find kind of irritating because we're going to have to get rid of it. But this is a non-templated project. Whereas if you do these other ones, if you look down here, there's a basic C++ oriented project, a first-person C++, first-person blueprint, a code flying blueprint, puzzle, side scroller, etc. So they actually have a bunch of templates to get you started. A vehicle game, generally in C++ and blueprint form. And it's a heck of a way to learn things. So if you want to just kind of play around, go in with the starter template, see what it creates for you, and go from there. There's also a number of actual full games that they've created, like a real-time strategy game, etc., that you can download from the marketplace, get the full access to all the assets, all the source code, everything, jump in and just see how things are done. But in this case, like I said, we're just going to create a blank one up here, blank, and since it's got no code, we don't need to pick between C++ or blueprints, because it's got none. And the other key thing is I'm turning off this include starter content. Now, starter content is a bunch of things to actually kind of get you up and going. Pre-made assets, pre-made materials, etc. Now, the nice thing is you can pull those in after the fact. We're actually going to pull in a shader at some point that's from the Paper 2D plugin. It's no problem. I'll show you how to do that. So don't worry over much about not selecting this. It just streamlines your project a bit. So here we go, creating a project called Hello World 2. And then we just click Create Project. There was a little pull down there. You could have selected the actual directory to create it, but this is being created in My Documents, Unreal Projects, or something to that effect. Okay, what did you just do? Just launched the launcher again. Alright, let's minimize that. I don't know why I wanted the launcher to run. Maybe I do need it going. Now, the catch is, like I said, I want nothing, and unfortunately, I didn't get nothing. If you look over here, and we'll do a bit of a tour of the user interface while we're here. So, welcome to the Unreal interface. You're going to spend a lot of time here. This primary screen right here is where you compose your world. You can see right here, there's a 3D view in perspective mode that is a hierarchy of your view. So you can see over here, this is your scene. Now, there's a couple key concepts to understand here. There's the scene outliner over here, and there's a content browser. The content browser is the assets that make up your game, but they aren't instanced in your game itself. So when you compose your scenes, when you drag things out, when you make levels, etc., that's in the scene over here. And that's what all this stuff is. So the player start controller is there. The light source, let's scroll out, is there. The floor is there, etc. So these are the things that make up a scene itself. Whereas over here, these are the things that create the assets of your game. We don't have any yet. We'll see that shortly. But this is where the things like sound files, shaders, 3D models, materials, textures, etc. They'll all reside here in a hierarchy you create. On top of that, there will also have things like your blueprints, your settings files for everything. That all goes down here. Now, on top of up here, you have sort of your palette, I guess we could call it. This is where the things that you compose your game out of are organized, or that's where they're created from. And some of this is actually starting to get a little obsoleted. There used to be something called CSG, which is I should remember this, something geography, geometry, construction, solid. There we go. Thanks to the power of Google, it is constructive solid geometry. This is the way that levels used to be made. You used to make shapes or yeah, basically shapes, and you call them brushes or whatever. You would carve your world out of them. You would build your world up out of primitive shapes, things like boxes, arches, etc. And then you would use Booleans and CSG style to basically create compound shapes and forms. For the most part, this isn't done anymore. So that renders a lot of this, things like your curved stair, your box, your curves, etc. This is legacy stuff. For the most part, you don't really use it anymore, but you will use this guy all the time. And generally what it is, let's say I want a camera for my game. You come over here and you search, you just type camera, there's your camera, and you drag it in. That's it. That's how you construct stuff. So this is used, this mode right here is for placing new items in your scene. This one is for painting. We're not going to touch on that right now, but if you've got landscapes or etc., you can definitely work with it that way. Speaking of landscapes, this is for drawing your world. We're dealing mostly with 2D, so we're not going to touch on any of this stuff. Again, foliage for adding greenery, trees, bushes, shrubs, etc. to your world. Not applicable to us. We're working in 2D again. And then finally, this is here is for editing your brushes and such. A lot of stuff, again, is legacy. It tends to be stuff that you're not going to use anymore. So as a 2D game, 95 times out of 100, or 9 times out of 10 if I want to be simpler, you're just going to use this guy right here to type in what you want. And normally, it's little things like cameras you're going to be placing in the scenes. But that's what this guy up here is for, instancing, and then this other stuff we're not using. Across your top, we're going to touch on this stuff later on, but this is your basically your control buttons. There's a few very key things here for simulating playing and launching your game. There's a difference level here. Is simulate is sort of exactly what it says, simulating the process execution. You can see how things are running, what the effects will be. You can watch it go through the blueprint live, but not necessarily running your game, not a full version. Play is actually running your game, but inside of the level editor. Now, if you click this drop down, there's more options for every menu option. You can do a mobile preview. You can launch it off into a new window, etc. And then finally, launch is for running it actually on devices. I don't have any devices plugged in right now, so I don't have an iPad or an Android device plugged in. But for launching it out to another device, you would use this. Rarely will you be using this at this point. Most of the time, you'll actually use play. But that's the basics of this bar. And then, of course, you got quick launches to the different the viewers, etc. And then your two guys you're going to use all the time up here. Matinee is for animations that we're not going to touch on. It's mostly for 3D work here. But blueprints and world settings are vital. And we'll touch on those a little bit more later on, but that's how you... this controls the properties of your world, brings up this window right here. And that's global type settings for your overall world. We'll use it a little bit, things like turning off gravity. Kind of important stuff. It brings up this tab over here. Let's close that down. And then your other guy here is your blueprints. And this is important. This is going to be for creating your game mode and your level blueprints and other blueprints. And we're going to be using blueprints, obviously, quite a bit, because they're going to be the logic behind our game. We're actually going to be using one later on in this talk, so we'll come back to that. But that's what this menu across the top over here is. This guy over here, once again, this is your... this is where your assets go. I guess the easiest way is to actually show you. So I'm going to come in here. We've got this folder called Game. And inside of it, I'm just going to create a new folder here called... textures, and then I'm going to create another one called sprites. And they're actually two different things. A sprite is a piece of a texture. We'll touch on that a little bit more when we touch on the graphic stuff. But now I want to go ahead and I want to add a texture to this game. The simple background that we're going to use, I blazingly ripped off from the internet. Just grab that and drag and drop. So now we have a new texture that we can use. If you come in here, you can click it and do edit, and it brings up the texture editor. There's all kinds of nested editors and windows and such inside of Unreal, and they can be open at the same time. You're going to want a lot of screen space if you've got it. I've got dual monitors, so I can move this stuff off to a different monitor, and it's very handy. But this is for editing textures itself. Not really a ton that we're going to be doing here. This is for changing the volumes, um, the biggest thing that we're going to touch on right here is actually something called mipmap generation. I'll cover this again in the graphics later on, but mipmaps are for multiple resolution versions. So, you know, when you're playing a game and something's really, really, really far away, well, there's no sense having a really high resolution texture for that. So instead, what they use is a mipmap, which is a very small version, a less detailed version that's generated automatically for you that uses less resources, less RAM, less everything. And then as you get closer, it starts swapping in the newer versions. That's mipmapping. In a 2D game, you actually don't want this. You never want to have multiple resolutions because your fixed sprite, what you're working with, is how you want it to be. And this can actually generate some weird artifacts on your results. So, for example, we often come in here and go, no mipmap, and then save. And then close. So that was the editing of a texture itself. So as you saw, there are dedicated editors for a lot of things. So that's a basic texture add to the game. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and create a sprite from it. Now a sprite is a portion of a texture. I'll cover this in a little more detail later on. So I'm just going to right click it and say create sprite. And then now we have a sprite. And I'll just drag that into my sprites folder. And I'll move it there as opposed to copy. So now in this folder we have our texture. In this folder we have our sprite. Again, I will cover what the actual difference is later on. But this is how you organize your game. Your game assets are all organized this way. Now remember earlier on when I told you we're not including the default content? Otherwise, this would have been a whole lot more cluttered up. All we've got is our game stuff. Now, sometimes you want that stuff. You want things from the base game engine, the things that are included with it, or you want things from Paper 2D, the 2D game engine part that's built into it. Well, nicely, you can grab that and just go over here and say, let's do show plugin content. This will show us the Paper 2D stuff. And then all of a sudden you see we've got this new folder here. And we can come in and we can see the assets that are included with Paper 2D. So if we want this material, maxed unlit sprite is generally the one that I end up using. We say we want the default sprite material. We can just grab it and drag it into our game and make a copy. And then if you want, you can turn that back off. So again, here I'll show you also their engine contents. So now if you come here and you browse through engine, you'll see reams of stuff. See, it gets very crowded though fast. So if you don't need it, don't include it. But if you want it back, you can easily get it. At the same time, you can also change the way that things are organized. Such. So this is where you organize the assets that make up your world. And that's generally all that this guy is for, but it is very handy. You also use it for instancing though. So when I want to go ahead and I want to add this sprite to my world, I just bring it from here, drag it here, it's in my world. So this guy is important. This content browser is a very key place. This is where your life is going to be organized in the future. So get very used to that. All right, let's go ahead and delete that. Okay, so that's a bit for the content browser. One thing to be aware of, there's actually different views of this. This actually threw me a bit. When I went onto my MacBook Air, this all looked completely different. I'm like, why are you in different layout? I hate this layout. What's going on here? Well, neat thing is, come over here, go to content browser. There's actually 3 versions of it. So there's the standalone window version, undocked, especially if you have multi-monitors. You've got where did that go? There we go. Okay, so just 3 different instances? It might just be 3 different instances, same version. Yeah, so you can have up to 3 of them going. And you will be, so a lot of times you'll be copying from here to there to here. Having multiple is definitely handy. Having unfloating is definitely handy. Let's see, collections isn't really relevant yet. You can organize things together. Save everything all with one button push. You can import things in, all the files that are actually supported. That's kind of the extent of it. So it's just a nice little tree hierarchy of the things that make up your world. And then as you bring them in, you can see them there. And if you have settings, so here's a texture. Here's the texture editor that brings up. Now I want you to notice something here. Here's a sprite. And I double click it. You'll notice a completely different editor. So there are tons of editors behind the scenes. We'll see this guy a little bit later on. And this is actually the difference between a sprite and a material. sorry, a sprite and a texture, and you're going to see the difference later on. A sprite is actually from a texture, I suppose you say, but I'm not going to spoil that for later. But there are tons of different editors as you go through. So let's go back to our world. So there we go. Here's our nice little 3D world. And a lot of times, especially when you're working in a game, there's a couple things to be aware of up front. First off, and this is really confusing, different applications, different 3D packages, etc., use different axes for different meanings. Blender uses Y up. That means Y is up and down in the world. Or is it Z up? I don't know. I mixed them all up. Some people use Z up, where X, Y, and Z. Z then, if you were looking at your monitor, means up and down on your screen, whereas X means left and right on your screen. And then theoretically, the third dimension is actually in and out of your screen. So it's either going to be Y or Z as the in and out screen. Now, Unreal has chosen to make Z up. You can see that down here. Here's a depiction of the three different axes. So Y is this, Z is this in this view. So let me switch over to top. So here we're looking from above. You can see the x-axis is this way and the y-axis is this way. Now, most confusing, what you're probably going to work from is either front or side. Generally front is what I work with when working on a 2D game. And this is confusing as hell. Because in my world, in the world of pixels, in the world of 2D graphics, you have two axes. You have x and y. Not in Unity. You have z and x. So up and down, instead of your y-axis, you're actually dealing with the z-axis. It's one of those things that's going to be a bit of a hang-up if you come from a traditional 2D engine. Just in your mind, wherever there's a y, swap it with a z, and it'll work for you. For the most part, the y-axis then is in and out of the screen, and we'll only ever use it for determining how things sit on top of each other for the perceived depth, because we're going to be rendering orthogonal, which basically ignores depth to start with. So the only thing you'll ever actually use the y-axis for is determining if things overlap or not, which is very critical later on down the road when we start working with physics and we want to see if something hits or doesn't hit. So it is important, it is confusing, and even more confusing is sometimes you actually have things that are actually in x and y coordinates, and you have to remap that in your head. So just one of those things to be aware of. Up and down on the screen, this dimension right here is actually Z and not Y. And there's no easy way to fix that. So unfortunately, just kind of get used to it. Now, it's one of those things, again, in the 3D world, in the world of Unity and Unreal, 2D is fake. You're actually still making a 3D game of flat surfaces. So that's why this situation exists. And again, it is going to be critical when we start dealing with physics that things will be at the same y coordinate if they want to hit, and different y coordinates if they do not want to hit. So now we've got this screen right here. This is sort of, like as I said, where your viewport into the world. There's a bunch of settings up here, things like snapping for snapping to the grid, making things go at a certain size, camera speed. You can maximize out, so you can have the 4-view split window or one single. If you work in max, this 4-view, so this being the front, top, front, we can change that out to side. So side, front, top, or we could switch this over to perspective and have your quad view right here. Or if we just want to go right back to a single one, you click it. Most of the time I actually work in a single view at this point in time, but sometimes it's handy to position things 2 times like that. And that's how you can switch between those 2 different views. Now, what's key, and when you're dealing with 2D, that's going to be a little confusing, is this guy. This is determining how your world is being shown. And a lot of times you're working, see, it's a raw wireframe. That's just showing everything, not texture, just the geometry that goes into it. And this is like a world, why can't I come up with this? Is like a, oh my god, like an environmental box. Come on, skybox, or sphere. That you're seeing wrapped around the world. This is providing the clouds. This is actually your sky sphere right here, which, let's go ahead and get rid of that actually. So you can toggle between wireframed, lit, which means the lighting in the scene is actually having an effect on the geometry in the scene, or unlit. And generally, you're probably going to want to work with unlit. Now, you can have lighting in a 2D game. Depends on the style of your game. A lot of times, you're not going to want it. You're going to have done the lighting automatically in the pixel art as you created it. So how this one is actually done is kind of up to you. But it is going to take into effect this light source here is going to, in an unlit, do nothing. In a lit, you can see it's going to have Okay, nothing. If there was stuff in the world to actually be reflected from, you would see the effect of this light on it. Now I'm actually going to go ahead and get it gone too. And we'll get rid of the fog as well. And we'll get rid of the player start as well. And we will get rid of the floor as well. So now we're actually back to a nothing world, which is wonderful. Oh, you know what? Before I got rid of everything, I probably should show you something. All right, so we got it all back. So we're in perspective view. So you sit here, you can go in top view, and we can go top view and show textures, etc. Like so. I should tell you about the navigation. You're seeing me do stuff, but I'm not actually explaining how I'm doing it. To zoom in and out of the world, and it's probably easier to show in perspective. To zoom in and out of the world, simply use your mouse button, your mouse wheel. So scroll in, scroll out. Now, right click is a pan. So you hold down the right mouse button and then turn, you'll orbit around. So your scroll wheel in and out, your right mouse button to pan, and then, sorry, that's not pan, that's orbit, and then your middle mouse button held down pans, like so. So those are your primary navigation mechanisms. So right mouse button to orbit, middle scroll wheel to zoom, and then hold down the scroll wheel or middle mouse button to pan. So those are your primary ways of navigating around a 3D scene. Like so. Okay? There are options for like framing to the selected, etc. We're not going to get into that right now, but there are hotkeys you can do to say, you know, zoom in on what I'm looking at, etc. Now, another key concept, and here I'll use this light as an example. So I'm right-clicking to select it, and you'll see this this widget comes up. And it's a little easier to see it or understand it from a perspective. There we go. Let's go to unlit. Okay. So this is my light select, and you'll see this widget right here for moving it. And the colors correspond with the axis. So the red axis is the x-axis here. The blue axis is the z-axis. And if I was off, if I wasn't in a perspective mode, like this, sort of a non-perspective mode like this, so if I was in perspective, you would see, let me see here, the y-axis is available as well, which is in green. And it always corresponds to the axis shown down here in the corner. So those are the three different directions of travel. Let me just, I'll stay in this mode. All right, so let's pan over so we can see it. There we go. All right, so there's our selected mode. Well, you can grab any of these manipulators and use it to move. Okay, so that's how you can position things in scenes. And you look over here, this is where the properties of the selected object are. So select an object using the right mouse button. So there, I've selected this bottom thing. Now I've selected the light again. You'll notice over here the details change. And this is where you set individual properties or components on a light or on an object in the scene, whatever. This over here changes. And then you'll notice as I'm moving it, let's move, it's updating over here in the position, like so. So if you want to fix that, you can come over here and you can select the value as well directly there. So we just moved the y to the 0. It moved to y and 0 on the axis. You should be able to see the axis a little bit clearer. You can't in perspective mode, but if I go back to the top, you'll see I'm at 0. Oh, for that guy. Okay, so that is your basics of movement. Now, there's a couple of really key hotkeys to learn. First one is normally Q. Q doesn't seem to actually do anything. Q puts you, I think, into select mode, and other things it does. So now when I hit Q and then I left-click something, I pick it. Pick it, pick it, pick it, pick it. Q is mostly for switching off another mode, but the key ones are, and this is your QWERTY keys here. It's W is your translate. Brings up this guy. This manipulator right here is the W key hotkey. Now, E is rotate, R is scale. And I know R not being rotated is a little confusing. I don't know why. This was all actually ripped off from Maya. Maya was the first 3D application to use this QWERTY hotkey thing. So select, translate, rotate, and scale are the three different values. And normally we can grab the middle manipulator, and it will do it in all directions. Okay, this one, okay, doesn't do that. That's bizarre. Or you grab an axis. Okay, why are you? Oh, because I'm picking the. Okay, it helps to pick something that can actually be scaled. So the middle scales in all directions, or you can pick and scale along a single axis, like so. All right, so then go back to translate. So press W, and we get this movement manipulator instead. So I can move it along this axis. I can move it along this axis, or I can pick right here in the middle, in theory, and move it. Come on, you little bugger. I should be able to move it in both at once. Anyways, so you pick the axis you want to manipulate along. You move it accordingly. And so W is to move. E is to rotate. Like so. And R is to scale. If you've used Max or Maya, that's a built-in hotkey. It's wired into your soul. Another thing to keep in mind is whenever you've got something selected and you don't want it anymore, it's almost always escape. So if in doubt and you're trying to get rid of whatever you're doing, hit escape. So that's the basis of your navigating the screen here. You use up here to switch between your different views. You use up here to switch between your different rendering modes. Over here to switch between quad view and back to a single view, like so. Here to switch between perspective and then your different settings. And there's a number of settings over here. You can actually split this out. So I could have 2 panes instead of 1. I can go back to single pane. I could make 3 panes the normal. Also, if I'm running on battery power, I can go in and turn this off of real time, save my battery a little bit. Means it's not going to be rendering at real time anymore, but it also means it's not going to be killing my CPU. Because if we come down here and we take a look, you will see that Unreal is running at a pretty steady 12% of CPU. Or I thought there was a battery here. No battery. Guess that's Mac only. Anyways, having something run at 10 to 20% at all times is going to drain your battery faster, and this will cut it down a little bit. It's one of those things that does help when you're on the road. It doesn't affect most people because most people are either on a desktop or always plugged in. But so that's your basics of navigation. On top of that, again, you have these other settings. We're not going to. This one you can use to do the same thing as the WER. So that's your translate, that's your rotate, and that's your scale. Transform that. We're not going to get into that. And then these are your snappings again for doing precision. And we're not going to really touch on that either. It's for a 2D game. We're not going to be doing too much. Maybe we'll touch on snapping a little bit later on, but it's not something that you need to be overly concerned about right now. So that's the basics of navigating the 3D world. And that's pretty much the user interface as you see it. So a quick recap over here to instance the things that go into your world, and then a bunch of stuff you're not going to be concerned with. We're working with 2D. Over here is where you organize your assets. You bring in your various things to the game that you are going to compose your game. Once again, there's property editors that are different for each one. There's also something really neat here. Can't really show you easily. Here, let's go ahead and create another sprite. Come on. And we'll move it to our sprite folder. That's right. I'm going to call this 2. Let's move that to our sprite folder, like so. So now I have multiple objects in here. Now the neat thing is if they're the same or they have the same properties, you can actually select them. And I just use left click to select. You'll see which one's highlighted, or shift click to multi-select like I've done here. And now you can come in and you right click and you use the property matrix. And this is a neat little spreadsheet-like view of all of the common values between them. So they can see they all have a source texture property. They all have an atlas group property. So if I want to set an atlas group for them, I can edit them all at the same time. So if they had an X coordinate or Y coordinate, depending on what kind of thing it is, if there's a bunch of them, you can edit them all on this one view. It's a nice way of making quick updates to multiple similar objects. It's a very handy thing. We're not using it right now, but it's neat to be aware of it. So let's go ahead and do a delete. So that is where you organize your world over here in the content browser. And then here's where you navigate and compose your scene. We covered the controls already. And then here is where you lay out your scene. This is where all of the stuff that goes into making your scene goes. Now we're going to go ahead and actually do something. Let's go ahead and create a scene. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to select all of this stuff and get rid of it. So now we have a nothing scene. I'm going to the front view. And I'm going to pan, so we are kind of about our axis. Right mouse button held down. There. So there's our world origin. And we're kind of right about it. If I press play, there's absolutely nothing to do here. I can go ahead and delete these because they've actually caused me problems in the past. Just from, they'll be recreated, don't worry about it. These are things that are created only at runtime. You'll notice they aren't existing otherwise. So if I stop, they're gone. But they're handy for seeing the properties, etc. later on. So here we are, brand new world, nothing in it. We have absolutely nothing going on. Now let's look at creating a sprite. We already got it created right here. Something I just randomly downloaded off the internet. Let's instance one into our world. So we're in our front view here. Bring this in and drop. Very cool. So we just created our first sprite. Now you'll notice something though. We can't see anything. Well, that's because we're in wireframe mode. And if you think about it, a sprite is actually a textured quad. This is what looks like behind the scenes. So without the texture mapping enabled, it doesn't make any sense. So let's go ahead and turn on unlit. And then boom, there's our texture in the world. That could be our scene background or whatever, and that's as easy as it is to create it. So basically, you instanced the texture, you imported the texture into your game, you created a sprite from that texture, and then you drop the sprite into your world, and that's it. Over here you can see the settings for it. This is your positioning. Once again, Y value is not used. That's the depth into the world. Not really something to worry about. So you have rotation and scale. We're at our standard scale and our standard rotation, so neither of these really matter to us right now either. If you want, you can lock them down as well. We don't really need to. This is showing where the sprite actually came from. So source sprite. So if we wanted to change it, we could do that. The other thing you can do is you can select something and then click this button and it updates to whatever is selected. Since we only have one, that didn't really illustrate too much. You can modify the material. You can also change the sprite color if you want, which will change the way that this is influenced. It's not really important to us right now. And then there's a whole bunch of properties and settings for everything. We're not going to really touch on any of that. We've got our sprite in the world. Now let's go ahead and press play. That's probably not what you wanted, because we have no setup camera. There's a camera being created, but it's not actually being configured. It's not looking where we want to. We could come up here and set it to, what was the exact setting I picked? One sec. All right, doesn't really matter. Now what we have here is, well, we don't have a camera. Now I'm going to pause for a second and tell you one thing that's kind of important. What we're doing right now is just an illustration. We're creating a very simple hello world with a background, and that's it. This is not how you would do things. Ultimately, you would do things, you would use a character controller, and a game mode. All very important things, and things we're going to touch on very shortly. So this isn't how you will structure your game. This is a very quick, easy demo. Later on, we would actually, like I said, create a character controller, which owns a camera, which has a game start, which is something I deleted when we began, etc. We don't want to touch on any of that. We're just kind of short-circuiting. But what I'm about to show you isn't how you would ultimately do things. It's a slightly different thing. So be aware of that. We're going to do things a little bit differently in the short future, but this will show you how to get up and started. So what we have, when we hit play here, we're not looking where we want to. Now, you can control orbit around in 3D, and then, oh, there it was. See, there's our texture. There. So obviously this isn't where we want it to be, and this is a little confusing. We actually have default, like a standard WASD third-person or first-person shooter view going on here. So we don't want that. What we want is a camera that's actually looking at what we've got. So let's go ahead and create one. Like I said, over here, with this guy selected, the placement option selected, filter in and pick camera. And just drag it into the scene like so. And you'll see right away there's a camera preview that's showing where your camera, what your camera sees. And we're kind of parallel to our view. And it's not really what we want yet, but this is the case. Now, one thing to be aware of, first off, there seems to be a bug in Unreal that orthogonal cameras do not render properly. So when placing your camera, set it as a perspective, then change it to orthogonal when you're done. There's a bug report about it, but it doesn't seem to have been fixed as of yet. So work in perspective, switch to orthogonal. Once again, an orthographic camera is a camera that doesn't have depth. When you're working in 3D on a 2D screen, your brain expects things as they get further away to be smaller, and that's what a perspective camera does. When an orthogonal orthographic camera, sorry about that, doesn't get smaller as the scene goes on. When you're working with sprites that are layered on top of each other, you don't want them to be tapered off based off of their Y value. That doesn't make any sense. So generally what we do is set it to orthographic. But in positioning it and working with it, perspective works best because, like I said, orthographic is bugged. So here, let's set up our camera. We'll position our camera so we have it looking at our background. And you can see there's this update right over here. So I'm just going to switch over here to the top view. And we're going to use the navigation controls we had before. I'll select our sprite so you can see where our sprite is. Our sprite is right along this axis here because it's at the 0 value. So it's actually right in line with that line right there. So you can't really see it, but that's where the sprite is. And that's why the manipulator is centered about its middle. Now what I want to do is switch over to this camera. And now instead I'm going to select, first off, rotate or press E. And we're going to rotate it 90 degrees. Like so. So now we're looking at our texture. And now I'm going to select W to transform, and I'm going to move it to the axis here, and now I'm going to move it back. So now our camera is looking at our world. Awesome. This is exactly what we want. We can switch on back to perspective if we want. There is an option you can lock this viewport to the lock viewport to camera view. Why are you not doing that? That should lock it to the camera. I'm not sure. Oh, there. So now this viewport is going to change as we move the camera. So we could create another viewport if we really wanted to. Like so. And hey, why'd you unlock? We'll set this one. Select our camera. Back. Say lock to camera. There you go. So camera 4 is going to be locked on this view at all time. And then over here, if you want, you can manipulate the camera and you'll see the results. Anyways, and I can switch over here and I'll show you it's orthographic, and you're not doing a really good job. There. So there is the results of orthographic. It works a little bit different. You set the overall width as opposed to the field of view. But in this case, like I said, it's a little bit bugged in the way that it works. So as you can see, this preview is no longer working. We'll switch it back to perspective. And you'll see the preview works again. Don't know why that bug's there. Hopefully it's something that gets fixed soon. Ignore it for now. So anyways, there's our camera in our world. So now we can see everything fine. Let's go ahead and run it. Actually, I'm kind of shocked that... Oh, it's because I locked it. That shouldn't have worked. Okay, so escape to get out of that. And now let's turn that lock off. And we'll go back to a single view. So here's our world in 3D. Like so. Whoa. Come on. There we go. So there's sort of, you can see how it's being set up. This is what it looks like in the 3D version. And then back to the front where we're actually creating the game. There's what it looks like in the 2D version. And then when we run it, that's not what we want. Okay, and this is on purpose because this is actually grabbing a camera from elsewhere. It's not using what we want. It's actually using some built-in. And so let's now write our first blueprint. Now what we want to do is we want to control it. We want to set our camera to be the active thing for our character control. There's a built-in character controller. Ultimately, we're going to create our own instance of it. But when you don't create one, it provides one for you. And the character controller controls quite a few things. We'll get into that in more detail. I don't want to get this to be too long, but I do want to show you your first blueprint creation. So here we got our scene, and somewhat importantly, I want you to have the camera selected. Now you come up over here and you see blueprints. Blueprints are critical, and we're going to open the level blueprint. This is the blueprint that goes along with our level itself. Create one, and I'll bring up our blueprint editor. As you'll see, there is completely new window, and this is welcome to blueprint programming. Very simple concept. For the most part, you're creating visual graphs or charts that control your program flow. And let's start very first off. We're going to create an event. This is one of the events available. Now, what you can do is right-click at any time and just start typing. So if we want an event, you can see all the different events that are available, etc. And you just pick one. And then here, begin play is sort of start. End play is end. Level cleanup is on level reset. Event tick is every frame of the world. And origin changed is, well, that's a little bit of a weird one. We'll ignore it for now. But what we want to do is we want to fire this event off. So you see it's color-coded in red. And it's got this little guy here saying this is what is going to happen. So this guy will be called by the Unreal Engine when play starts. So this is sort of your main, if you will. This is where execution begins for this particular script. And now you can have, if I want, I can have a whole whack of these. I can. Okay, maybe I can't. I thought I could. Sec. Okay, nope, I can have one. Never mind. I thought I could. I can handle a whack of events anyways, but let's go back to what I was talking about here. This is what is going to fire off when you start your code. And this window is still live, so you can manipulate over here. Now, make sure you've got your camera active over here. So that's the name of your camera in the scene. And what we want to do is right-click and say Add Reference to Camera. So that brings our camera. So we now have our camera is available in this blueprint too. And we want to do one more. And it's called Character Controller. And sometimes you got to turn off this because it's going to guess what you want based off what you got selected. So since I had the camera selected, it filtered down to the camera options. What I actually want is Character Controller. Player Controller. Okay, so that gets the player controller. We'll touch on that later on. It's a very central object, but basically that's your player in the world. This gets a reference to them. This gets a reference to the camera from our scene, and this is an event that is going to fire when our game starts. So now what we want to do is set view target with blend. And this is a function. That's why the little F's here. So this is a function we're going to call. And now you need to string together program flow. And this is an event that's going to fire. And when it fires, we want it to call this function. So that's what this wire just did. You can get rid of that. You can delete it after the fact. No worries at all. You can select things easily enough. You can hit the delete key to get or you can break the link back out. So just drag between to connect the two links together. So that's what's saying. So when this blueprint launches, so when this when the play event is fired, this function will be called. Now we want to set a couple parameters to this function. First off, we want to say we want to set the view of the target controller. So we just go. So this is a function that's saying get the player controller, and we wire it up to the target. So the target of this function is the player controller. And next thing we want to do is set its value, so new view target, to our camera. So just grab there, and click there. And that's it. So now we are done with this. Their very first blueprint was just created. Click here and click compile, and then you see the check mark, so everything worked out fine, and we're good to go. So recap what's going on here. When our game starts, it's going to call this function. This function takes two parameters. One is the target, which is the player character controller, something we'll talk about a little bit later on, but essentially think about this as the player. And what we want to do is set the player's view to our camera. So all that this code is really doing is saying, when this game starts, set this camera as active on the player controller. And that's what all of this does. The rest of this is for blending. We're not actually doing any blending, so it doesn't really matter. Now, if you had more code to execute, so after this event fired, you want to do something else, you just drag this off over here, and then add whatever thing you wanted to do next. We don't. Literally, this is all we want to do is when the game starts, get the player controller and set its view to our camera. That's what this script's doing, and that's all we've done here. Okay, so you've just created your very first blueprint. Congratulations. So now when we click on back over here, and actually I'll show you one last thing before I go. You can grab all of this guy, because this gets pretty sloppy pretty fast. Like you've got, your blueprints could get huge for different functionality. So this is a set function that does a very defined thing. Let's just grab a box all the way around it, like so. Now, I guess I should tell you navigation. To zoom in and out, use the scroll wheel. To pan around, use the right mouse button. So there is our everything selected. Now hit the C key, and you do a comment. And it's set player camera to camera actor 4. And that's a description of it. So now you can easily see what this particular chunk of your blueprint did. Nice way to organize things together. That's about it. So there's your very first blueprint. Congratulations. We'll compile it and done. So now when I run this code, boom, it's automatically grabbed our camera. and it's set up and it's ready to go. And once again, this is not how you're actually going to control the camera. It's just a very quick, simple demo. We're actually going to create our own character controller coming up. So ignore that for now, but that is how you can set a camera to run and be set to the controller on start. And that's kind of it. Now, I guess I have to officially make this hello world. And in order to do that, we need to add another object, and that's a text render. Just select it over here, and then drag it onto your scene. Over here in Properties, set hello world. You can change the font, the alignment, etc. There's actually a fairly impressive amount of options for their text rendering, which is a little weird. Go and select it. So there, hello world is now active. Change it to color to, let's go with blue. Okay. And run. Why are you not blue? Might be part of my texture material is not working. Doesn't really matter. We can cover on that later on. It's not a big deal. You can change out the materials that are involved. We'll touch on that later. There's a material editor. There are shader nodes and programming and all those things in the background. Very insane. We don't want to get into too much detail right now. Actually, that's all the detail we want to get into. So that was your very first, very simple Unreal Engine application. You just successfully created Hello World. And what this essentially does, starts up, draws the sprite in the background, draws this, grabs the camera, points it at it all, and done. Very simple, very easy. Let's stop that down. And over here you can see all of the different pieces and select them that make up your world. Again, there's this preview. When you get a camera selected, you got this preview window. And once again, it's currently bugged, so it does not work in orthographic. So let's go back to perspective. Yeah, that's kind of it. So welcome. You just created your first Hello World application. I hope you enjoyed that. Quick recap again. This is the main editor. There are 1,000 little editors hidden in behind it. Over here is where you outline your actual scene. That's the instances, the stuff that's going to be drawn on screen, the things that go together to make your scene. Over here is where you organize your content. These are the assets that make your game. You more or less instance these to create scenes. So you can think of this as a collection of Lego blocks, and this as you placing those Lego blocks to actually make stuff. Over here is where you instance things. Over here is where you manipulate the world. Once again, QWERTY, control these three different things. Well, technically not QWERTY, it's actually just WER. That's your move, rotate, and scale options. Your snappings, we're not really get into. Start your blueprints using this button up here. Global world settings we'll touch on in the next episode. And then to run, click your play button right here. Over here, when you have something selected, you can get the properties of it set here. Again, you can also configure global world settings by clicking there. And that is, in a nutshell, Unreal Engine. Now, nice thing is, since we're working in 2D, it's simplified a bit. We don't need to get into a lot of the bigger complexities, because some of this lighting stuff, this matinee, the animation stuff, it's really complex. And we're not dealing with any of that, which is kind of cool. We are going to touch on the stuff. There's going to be some stuff that works. And basically, you're using 3D and faking it in 2D, like physics. And then you're going to get other stuff, like your 3D mesh stuff, that it's going to show up there, but we're not actually going to be using it, at least not in this series. So welcome to Unreal Engine. I hope that all made sense. If you have any questions, let me know. I will fill them out before in the bottom. I'm also going to try and do text equivalent to this. It's not going to cover the same amount of material. Like, we just went on for about almost an hour there, and that was a lot to cover. So I hope you kept up. I hope I didn't lose anybody there. If I did, please let me know. Again, I will cover it in the questions at the bottom. But I'm going to create more of a reference, or like a static guide that goes along with this. Things that will have like the hotkey references. Here's what you use to pan the camera around. This is what this panel does. This is what that panel does. Sort of a quick reference of what we just covered. So keep an eye on Gamefromscratch.com. I'll link it in the comments when I'm done publishing it. So they will go together. And hopefully for every video tutorial I do on this, there will be a corresponding text tutorial. Like I said, there will not be 100% overlap. I can't cover the same amount in text that I am in video, but it should also be very handy for you, especially if you're listening along to that and go, hell, what did he say? Well, you might be able to do the text version a lot faster. We're just starting out again. A lot more to cover. Next up, we're going to actually be looking at, I think, I'm either going to cover the character controller or a little bit more on 2D graphics and creating animations in Sprite books. So I'm going to cover one of those two. I'm not sure which one next. But those are the two next topics we're going to get into. They're probably going to both be a little bit shorter now that you have a general overview of how everything works. Now we're going to get into the specifics of actually making it do what we want to create a 2D game. Hope that was useful to you. Please stay tuned for the next part. Again, your feedback is critical, so let me know if I wasn't clear, if I didn't cover something, if there's something you want to see covered. Let me know, and I will respond to it with the ongoing series. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.